Hello, my name is Chris McGale. I'm the author of The $1 Million Irishman from John Street to Wall Street, and this is the Shadows Project with Tim Curry and Terry Melia.
In today's episode of the Shadows Project, we speak with Chris McGale about his extraordinary true story filled with the full spectrum of human emotion. Physical and mental agony, a meteoric rise to life in the fast lane, reconciliation and acceptance are just a handful of the many ingredients of his amazing book, The $1 Million Irishman.
Because like the start of the story starts off with your terrible accident, and you talk about cascading emotions where you'd laugh at like something mildly humorous. So you'd laugh.
Coronation Street would make me laugh,
Yeah.
you know.
and then you'd be in tears over something, some tiny thing, This morning I sat down. I had to write down some things that were in my mind rather than sort of like script what we're going to say. I just thought, what can I remember from the book? And I started writing down lots and lots and lots, lots of words. So like boxing, gambling, your brother Paul, all these things. And I realized the story just does go with cascading emotions a lot. It goes from the lowest lows, really, hard times to amazing highs, like when you said you went to Barbados, I think it was.
In Concord,
Concord, sipping champagne and like every boy's dream, So this is, so it goes up and down, and then throughout, the theme of the book is this cascading emotion, which I thought was really, really, wonderful. Could you just outline the story for us?
Good stuff. Thank you, Tim, very much, and Terry. Great to chat to you guys. What's the story about? The story essentially is from John Street to Wall Street. So working class boy from Northern Ireland, goes back to school at 18 and makes it through an amazing maze of opportunities and all the way to the top in the UK City Investment Bank at Merrill Lynch, where I became a managing director. That makes me the top 5% of the whole firm, which was nearly 70,000 people. Managing director, country manager for Ireland, which was a very unique situation. There weren't many of them. And also I was being paid $1 million a year. So I was in the $1 Million Club, which again, it was the top 1% of the country. So it was an amazing experience. And how the hell did I get there is the question, and that's the beauty of the story. So the story began called the Humpty Dumpty Man, and Terry helped me very much self-publish that. But the background of the Humpty Dumpty Man is it was a story about my near-death car crash. So, I went onto a lorry. I was about to die. A lorry's coming over my head, basically, and it's coming down on you hear the screech of the steel on steel coming onto the front of the bonnet of the car, across the engine, smashes through the glass, is coming down to kill me, and lands on the steering wheel and turns the car and me away from the underside of the lorry, and I lived to tell the tale.
Well,
so
the part of that where you're talking about that in the book is like I think you need like a medical degree to understand it. If you want to revise like sort of like parts of the body, scapula, clavicle, mandible, metacarpals, all these things, it was like so many bits of you were smashed to pieces. Yeah,
the only parts of me above my waist that moved that weren't affected were these two fingers. Everything else was severed or damaged. It was through nerve damage or one thing and another. It was colossal. I also have a separate, it came down and severed me all the way down here in my hands. I lost my elbow joint, severed some ribs. And there are two ribs that sit here that are separated because the lorry came right down, punctured my lung, obviously. The two ribs are two parts of the same rib are separated because you breathe 20,000 times a day. They never get a chance to knit. So anyway, I crashed, and the noise of the crash was such that the family in a house on the hill next to where I crashed thought it was, inverted commas, another bomb, because I crashed in Bandit country, which is between Northern Ireland and the Republic, in a no-go area for the police and the army. So this was difficult. So it was a few hours before anyone actually got to me. But in the meantime, the ambulance and the fire brigade had come and taken me away. And then they reported I was dead to my sister. Which was, of course, not true. And that related to the fact that I had a donor card because my elder brother, had died a year before and brought that news to her as well. So she learned I died a year after my brother, and it wasn't true. But on the day, a nurse saved my life. So she was 18, a trainee nurse, not really a nurse at all, a young girl. And she got into the smoking car, and her father, with her. And without those guys, I would have died. And she told me subsequently, the first thing I saw, she got into the passenger door, which was largely unaffected, that side of the car. She said, the first thing I saw was the hole in your arm. And then she said, I had to open your airways. Now, what that meant is I have a huge scar here running down my neck to about there. So another inch, I'd have been beheaded. I knew I had my jugular cut, but anyway, what happened is I was choking on the blood and I would have died. So 1 minute, 2 minutes, I would have died. But this girl saved my life. So anyway, they took me to Belfast. First of all, another huge stroke of luck. They ventilated me in Newry because a consultant from Belfast was there on day release. And again, a massive stroke of luck. Second time my life was saved that day. He said I would have died if I hadn't been there. Took me to Belfast. And then they operated on me, 5 surgeons for 5 hours. And they put me back together again and called me their Humpty Dumpty man. And that's a short version of that. So the book evolved from that. I had a huge number of reviews. So again, Terry gave me all the advice about how to get on Amazon and what to do. So I had a publishing offer back in 2014. So I always knew the story was good enough. But with the lockdown, I thought, right, I've got to finish it now. I've been writing this thing on and off for nearly 20 years. And then published it myself because there wasn't really an option of going looking for a publisher during lockdown and so on and so on. Mm-hmm. So that book makes up 80% of the current book, which was launched 2 weeks ago, called The $1 Million Irishman, From John Street to Wall Street. And basically that story, The Humpty Dumpty Man, has 90 reviews, and The $1 Million Irishman on Audible and Amazon have more than 20. So together, the 2 books are 110 reviews, and there's more than 95-star reviews, which is phenomenal. So I believe in the story. It's a great story.
I didn't read the first book, The Humpty Dumpty Man, but this one. You said something about, I think there's more about your brother in this book. Your brother.
Yeah. So I was going to come to that. I mean, The Humpty Dumpty Man, I always wanted to finish it about my brother's death. It's a sort of perverse thing to think about. So I've been writing it, say, from that moment of going back to the Christ scene to when I finished it 6 years later, with the intention of finishing it with Paul's death. So very difficult thing. I always had the intention of finishing the previous book with Paul's death, which I did. It was very hard to write. So I actually only wrote that last summer. And then I published the book in October. And some people said to me, oh, you rushed it because you didn't really tell the full story about Paul. And I had told a lot about Paul. In the early drafts of the book, he wasn't in it at all because of our problem together, which went on for nearly 2 decades. And by the way, if anyone's listening to this and you have a problem with your brother or your sister, just don't go and sort it out. Yeah. So we were reconciled completely, and this is the beauty of it. It's not like a partial reconciliation; it was total. Because what happened to us is we were orphan kids. Our mother died when I was 12, and Paul was 13, going 14. Then the school system, and he was a very, very bright guy, and so am I, dare I say. I didn't get where I got to for no reason. And basically, they took this guy who was a great guy, tall, unlike me, tall, handsome, intelligent, outgoing, and they actually destroyed him. So there are pictures of him making his first Holy Communion, and he's the top guy, the guy, the standout guy, the tallest guy, most handsome, the guy in charge is my brother Paul, right? And then they beat him up after our mother died. That was March 75. They gave him a very bad beating, such that they had to call home and call my sister, and they said, which one are you? To my sister, who was 17, she said, Marie-Anne, the eldest, you better come and get your brother. Which one? Paul. So she took him home and put him to bed. 2 months later, they expelled him. Just, chat about pastoral care and looking after. So they got rid of him, and that was, he just turned 14 then. By 16, he was a tall guy, looked 18, he was drinking, we had a pub. By 18, he was in his first alcoholic treatment center. So that's what the Christian Brothers did to Paul. I went back to school at 18, and Paul went sober. He found a girl and went sober, and another number 18, he went sober for 18 years. So during that period, we were reconciled, and everything was great. And then he called me up and said, look, will you be my next of kin? I just split from his wife, taken a few drinks, Within a few months, he was back on chronic alcoholic and had a huge fall. And from that point forward, it was downhill. He ended up dying in his flat of a brain hemorrhage, stone cold sober, 2 years later.
Sorry to interrupt, Chris. I'm just thinking there, one element of the story that jumped out with me was the synchronicity. In one particular scene, Paul's recovering after this terrible accident. He's brain damaged. And you're watching him on Scottish television as he's sort of, he's getting ready for this uphill race for charity, I believe.
Yeah.
And you see that because of the injury, one side of his body is out of sync. And then the telling moment is when you realise that it's the opposite side of your own injury that's out of sync. And I think looking at the reverse of that, it sort of brings you both together, it makes you whole as one person.
There's an incredible series of events, you know, that makes us whole, which is a nice term, Terry. That was one. So I had the same injury, as you say, on the other side. Great observation. And when I watched him, I observed that and thought, God, look at that, you know. And then I thought, well, I'm the same, you know, and had a laugh at myself in that moment. But when I went to see him in the hospital, and that was 2005 when he had the fall, and he died in 2007. So he was sober after the fall, and you know, we'd been reconciled 2.5 years at that point, you know, so everything was fine. And you go and see your brother in hospital, and it's pretty horrific, you know. He had a bad accident. So he's been in an induced coma just as I was. And I go in and holding his hand, and I'm saying, it'll be all right. And that is exactly what the nurse said to me. And I know that because she told me so. And she told me so after that had happened with Paul. So she told me in 2014 when I went back to the scene of the crash. And then I started to write again because I had these flashbacks. So she told me that day that she saw the hole in my arm. He had to open my airways, and she told me, and I kept saying, it'll be all right, it'll be all right. At which point I get this huge shiver. That's what I said to Paul. So anyway, synchronicity, yes, lovely, Terry, thank you.
Yeah. So the story, like with your brother, this relationship when you were younger, and it seemed like you got your life like really on track later on in life when you, well, sort of early 20s, yeah. And you had this accident, and it was like after all these troubles, and the troubles in Ireland were like reflected by the troubles at home. Yeah. So it was like you mentioned in the story that trouble followed you like Crocodile Dundee somewhere. And it just seemed, you know, you'd reach these real highs and lows, and your brother had the same troubles. But like you said, he was an intelligent guy. He graduated university. I think he was in chemistry.
Yeah, he went to the Open University, in fact, and worked as a storeman. So he came from the very bottom up, which was fabulous. He was married, living in Edinburgh, you know, making a living and doing Open University in the evening time. And when he graduated, he went to Glasgow Sync schools and had a policy of working in the worst schools possible with kids to help them. So that was a wonderful thing. And then he moved on to St. David's High School in Dalkeith in Edinburgh. It's in Edinburgh. And of course, he was a complete Celtic fanatic, you know, which is why he was over there, actually, probably as much as anything else. And a season ticket holder. And one of the story is that he had forgotten after the accident. He was in a medical centre called Astley Ainsley in Edinburgh, and he was being helped by the Headway group, who he ran a race for, who are a head injury charity up there. And basically, they were all sitting around watching a match involving Celtic, and he's going like, he didn't remember that he was a Celtic fan, you know. And then suddenly all these guys somebody was a Rangers fan and was shouting down Celtic, and he's thinking, bloody hell, there's something wrong here, you know. And then he started to remember that he was a Celtic fan, and as I wrote in the book, not a Celtic fan, a fanatical Celtic fan, and it's a great story. So Paul, anyway, had a parallel recovery, and I had a parallel recovery because we were victims of terrible, terrible events, you know. I mean, I'm only learning this now. Actually, I wrote this whole story without really coming to terms with some of the things that have happened to us, because I tell the story not chronologically, but as a sequence of events, you know. And as you say, you know, they're so interlinked. They're up and down, and but actually, the more I think about it today, the more I understand that we were absolutely abused kids, you know, in more ways than one. Not sexually, but everything else, you know, in terms of beatings and abuse in one way or another. And you got this stuff going on in Northern Ireland, which was death and destruction all the time as your backdrop. And so I got out of that very, very lucky. I went back to school. I was working in a factory, earning 20 quid a week. It a clamp came down and crushed my finger. I went to the local health centre. On my way back, I walked into Omagh Tech and went back to school, and the rest is history, which is a glorious story and piece of good luck. Paul went to Open University, became a chemistry teacher. So when we met and we reconciled in Omagh, I'll throw the story in quickly. He was back on the drink, so I said I went to his place and he was there, and I said, "So what's the story?" And, I wasn't angry or cross. I wasn't lecturing. I wasn't doing anything like that. He said, "So what's the story? If you don't mind me asking, you're on the drink." He said, "Just a few beers." And within a few minutes, he said, "Will you be my next of kin?" Now, I didn't for a moment think that was something that was going to have to play out in the near future, but he obviously did. A few months later, he was chronically drunk, and I had to go and help him in Edinburgh.
I think like you had there's lots of psychology, behind it, lots of things to unpack. Maybe the story was the book is a kind of way to do that you can articulate it properly in your writing, get your thoughts onto paper. But because in the story, the physical injuries were terrible. You were in ICU for like 9 days and in the hospital, like the rehab for months and months, 6 months or something. Yeah. And obviously, but it was the psychological parts that got to me a bit more when they're telling you to, take 7 away from 98 or something. And then you maybe sarcastically say, like, you went back, you took 7 away, and then you take another 7 away and another 7. Okay. It's a quick lead to show that your numbers, but you said you read the Irish Times and you couldn't see the words, but you couldn't make sense of the sentences. Yeah. So how long did this take to to get over? Or do you ever get over it? Because it was like, sorry, just you had you said 22 years later you remembered the accident when you were on a plane. Yeah. Fully. Yeah.
Well, so connecting those 3 stories, I'll give you a quick one here. It was very scary in the Josh Caldwell Rehabilitation Centre, and it was like a scene out of The One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. As I said in the book, you're looking around all these people and you think, Christ, I'm not as bad as that, And of course you are, but I mean, it's a human defense mechanism at play. I was probably worse than half of them at least. And all around the place, you got bomb victims, burn victims, stroke victims, as I said, victims everywhere, RTA victims like me, everyone really badly hurt, So you look around and think, bloody hell, what am I doing here? And of course, by the end of the day, they've beaten you up big time. It's part of what they have to do to make you understand you're like this as well, mates. We'll help with your balance problems. Like, what balance problems? Will help with your speech defect. What speech defect? And all the time you think, oh my God, why am I here? Will I ever escape? You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave, and I'm thinking, bloody hell. So the question about the taking away the numbers was a triumph for me and the whole stress of the day. So I'm naturally very good with numbers. So they said, take 7 away from 100. And I said, is that what you want? Yeah, thinking, surely it must be harder than that, right? So I went 93, 86, 79, 72, 65, 58, 51, 44, 37, 30, 23, 16, 9, and 2.
Chris, can I just ask you about, I'm thinking in terms
said,
of...
what? Sorry, Terry.
No, I was going to lead on from that about moving into your career in finance. As a youngster, you're living above this bar, you're keeping the scores in darts games, knocking the scores down, minus addition, you're adding up the prices of a round of drinks. You're training as a champion boxer with a controlled aggression. You're looking at the form of horses, working out the odds, playing poker. All of this, it leads to, your brain expanding for your mental agility for maths. Was this fair to say it's a good background as a life into high finance?
I wouldn't recommend it as it happens, but it certainly worked for me.
Chess games as well, you were good at chess. Yeah.
That was my Christian brother O'Reilly. It's the same sort of mental skill. My kids have it as well. It's just a memory recall thing. It's fabulous. I'm very proud to say it's run down the family and the bloodline, and it's great. It's a pleasure to see it be repeated, but what it is just an ability to see something and retain it, and like I've just done. That's a practice thing. That 7 from 100. I can sort of see the numbers flashing up on memory cards. I can see 44-37, you know, like in front of me. And Terry, thanks again for the summary there. We've got some great points you made there, and they're all true. You've read the story, both of you, and it's a pleasure to hear the questions being asked like that. A controlled aggression, you know, I was a very good boxer, and I believed I was going to fight for Ireland. I was going to win the Ulster final. I was twice county champion. The first time my mother died, so I didn't get to progress to the higher levels because we didn't do it, obviously. But the second time around, you know, I'd become a very good boxer and controlled aggression, and then you know, I lost that and was really shocked at the time that I lost, and it turns out I had tuberculosis and spent 6 months in hospital with that nearly. Me and Paul, and that's what really caused all the problems between us, because he was drinking, and you know, the tuberculosis, otherwise known as consumption, is also called the disease of the urban poor, you know, which we were not, but you know, he was hanging out that way and gave me the disease, and I was crazily angry with him. Plus, I always intended to go to America, and the TB on my record meant I wouldn't be going to America. And so we had no plan for life, Terry. You know, like, I was just drifting along, hoping to go to America, and you know, I would have been on a building site in America, and that would have been that. So anyway, as you say, I'm a numbers guy, and you know, controlled aggression. I was very good at horses. I was very good at poker, and I knew how to win. And I'm going to say something now, which is not normally expect to hear in this. I wasn't thinking about saying, but I can make people do things they wouldn't otherwise do. You know, I've got this sort of power of, and that's, so in poker, I'd force people, I'd beat them up, you know, crazy stuff, you know, and make them drop their hand or raise the bets, and aggression and hostility, you know, and I learned a long time ago, you know, and this carried right through to the city, right, that trait. I learned a long time ago when I was just a child of maybe 14 years old, and I write this in the book, and it's a chronic line in its own way, but true. You know, I learned that winning was more important than being liked. So I went through my whole life as a single-minded, you know, I'm a Marmite man. At least half the people hate me, you know. It's like, and I don't mean dislike me, hate me, you know. It's a crazy world, but I've conditioned myself that way, and you know, I had to, because there was no parents and there was no social system, no school. They kicked us out. Everything was hostile. You know, the war on the streets of Northern Ireland, the conflict in the home, the conflict outside on the streets with friends, you know, conflict in poker games. It was a crazy world, and so yeah, it equipped me well, Terry, to finally answer the question for life in the city, which is a real dog-eat-dog world that it doesn't suit a whole lot, doesn't suit most people in my experience.
This fight that you lost was against Barry McGuigan's sparring partner. It says. Yeah. What happened to him? Did he win the tournament, or?
I don't know, I'd say, to be frank with you, but he was very good. I mean, obviously, you know, my son, my 13-year-old, is a fabulous footballer, and it's a pleasure, you know, to watch the training he gets and everything like that. You know, it's just phenomenal. He's a fabulous athlete, everything, you know, hockey, tennis, everything, golf, you name it, whatever we've got time to do, and we're doing it all. And I was sort of running around punching a punch bag at my boxing club, and, you know, the level that training was at, and it got better actually as the years went on. Of course, as I got better, you sort of understood it better, and maybe using the medicine balls and things, and just speeding up the hands and so on. But I got absolutely hammered by somebody who was just on a different level on the training front, maybe not on the boxing front, the technique and everything. And boxing is very, very technical. It's not just about going in there and slugging it out. But I got absolutely hammered, and I thought, and that was the end of my boxing career. It was actually another one of my lucky breaks in life, because if I had still been boxing and thinking about boxing for Ireland, I probably wouldn't have gone back to school. So there we are.
It's like the thing with COVID. You said you got this time to finish your book, yeah, and you take a bad situation and make something good out of it. Whereas lots of people just take that bad situation and they just complain about it rather than doing something positive.
Well, thank you. It's true. You know, I know that, right? I'm a survivor. You know, first and foremost, I'm a survivor. What are you, Chris? I'm a survivor. I have a tremendous empathy. So I love chatting to you guys. I love the human engagement. I'm very good at making people do what they wouldn't otherwise do, because I've got great empathy. But, you know, on my tombstone, they'll write, "Here lies a survivor." That's the Spike Milligan-esque one. Spike Milligan wrote, I told you I was ill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Survival and getting on, Tim, is what it's all about. You know, every day you just got to get up and go. Now, I'm not Superman, right? I have my down days and lots of them. But right now with the book, it's such a high. I hope you feel the energy.
It's like people say to me, "What's your aim of the channel? You know, what you're trying to do?" And I was like, "I don't know," but because I was speaking to some lady last week, and she said, "I said I don't know, but if you do something, it will take you in you know, different directions and it'll make your life interesting. But if you do nothing, nothing's going to happen, you know." So this is my like idea. I was sitting there, I wasn't doing much, and I thought, okay, we're going to start doing more of these interviews, and then Terry knows loads of people. That's Terry's like the superstar striker, yeah. George Galloway himself, many great writers, isn't there?
Yeah, it's great. It's just great human interaction between the three of us, and you know, if we weren't on this today, would be lesser for it. So thank you, Tim and Terry.
Another theme in the book is like male role models, yeah. So you talk about your father. You had is like he cast a big shadow because he was like a Guinness, the best bottled Guinness in the region or something. And then you have these other male role models. You said you kind of sort out like Father O'Reilly, Brother O'Reilly, and different people in your life. Can you just talk about some of these male role models and how important it is, you know, for young people to have them?
Yeah. Well, listen. It's a great question, and actually, it was, you know, as you know, Terry, writing the book, you don't have I didn't have a plan of the book. You know, it was like progressing through the whole history, but avoiding being chronological. So that was the challenge. Yeah. And the piece I wrote about significant males was very interesting. You know, I hadn't thought about it, but as I started to piece together in the story, all these people who had made a difference in my life, and they all happen to be male, as it happens. Doesn't necessarily need to be that way today, but it certainly was for me. And also in the story, you know, when we were orphan kids, you know, my dad died when I was 3, and Paul was 4, going 5. You know, there was a massive conflict between us because then we were trying to be next to our mother, you know, and the younger kid was running out, and that caused trouble between us. So then when our mother died when I was 12, he was 13 going 14. So in that period between those two events, you know, then somebody said to me in another question, you know, so you lost your mother at 14, but you lost your brother as well. And I said, well, I hadn't thought of that, but you're right, you know, and sort of digressing for a moment. So the whole time we were growing up, we had this idea we were the McGales of John Street. So as I joked with you earlier on about meeting Paul in this pub in John Street and nobody knew who we were, you know, we laughed. Oh, we're the McGales of John Street and people don't even know who we are. You know, it was quite a funny moment. And at that time, Paul was a fabulous athlete. You know, he was a marathon runner, and he was running that marathon thing, that Edinburgh run, Terry, for Headway, as I said, charity, because he found all these marathon medals. He had forgotten that he was a marathon runner. So he was a fabulous athlete, and so he's sitting there on this pub stool in a suit and this athlete drinking a beer, and he looks perfectly normal to me. Right? Who am I to say, you know? And anyway, we were the McGales of John Street. That was the whole thing, and we didn't need anybody else. You know, we were McGales of John Street. So that's how our mother sort of raised us. Anyway, in life, going back, for example, primary school, whilst going into 11 plus, I was drilled by a Christian brother, drilled in a very positive way. You know, he's a brilliant man, Brother O'Reilly. And we stayed after school and played Scrabble and chess and, you know, whatever else, mind games in one way or another, and ran essays for mock papers for the 11 plus. So by the time we came around to 11 plus, it was a doddle in the park sort of thing. And then the contrast of that going into Christian Brothers Grammar School, where they were beating everybody up and running around with, you know, the iron rod, inverted commas, you know, and it gave Paul a really bad experience, but also effectively kicked me out too. They didn't expel me, but they didn't want me to stay. We were disruptive influence, you know, you can imagine. So anyway, and then it was nobody then at all. You know, the headmaster at the next school was a great guy. He's mentioned in the book. So between her death in March, all the abuse we got, you know, at the Brothers, including when I met the subsequent headmaster, a lay teacher, and they offered nothing. They didn't say, "Oh, you poor lad, we can help." They were just keen for us to go. Guys, get out of here. We're trying to keep up the standards, and you don't meet them. So they beat him up and expelled him, and then I went and I left too. And there was nobody home to say, "Oh, you shouldn't leave the brothers, the grammar school, your education, your career." Nobody, nothing. So I left, and basically we went off to the next school, and the headmaster there was a Tyrone Gaelic legend, a guy called Don Donnelly, and he was a fabulous guy. And the first thing he did was sat us down and said, "Look, you need to be proud of your family." And this was the first time, 6 months after our mother's death, that anybody had said anything to either of us about outside the family itself. And then I didn't meet his standards. I didn't want to be part of this education thing, and I was doing my own thing. I was spent my days hanging out in bookie shops. Actually, literally, people can't believe that. And I was doing the numbers and gambling and betting on horses and playing poker and working in the barn, getting paid for it, and making money. And that's all I cared about. And I was going to go to America, and boxing kept me sane and sober, as I said in the book. So, and then it all went wrong. Got into TB hospital, lost the boxing, and everything's going, "Oh, for God's sake." And then I'm working in this factory, getting paid 20 quid a week. Disaster. Going absolutely nowhere, and TB on my record, wondering how I'm going to get out of this place and get to America. And then I caught my finger in the machine, crushed my finger, and went back to school. And the Omagh Tech guys, who were absolutely fabulous, best people ever in my life at that time. And then they helped me through into Queen's University, and there was a couple of great lecturers there as well, again, males, a chap called Victor Hewitt. And then I went into Deloitte, and there was a guy there who sort of was looking out for me, and people, I sort of gravitated towards these people, this empathy thing, I'd find somebody and attach myself. It wasn't a plan, I didn't think, "Oh yeah, I'll find somebody." But if I look back, that's essentially what was happening. And then people would look at me and think, "This guy's not right. There's something wrong here, we need to look out for him, and all the time, my way through life, I had people looking out for me, even though I wasn't saying I need help or anything like that. They could just say, "Oh, it's this guy. What is the story here?" You can imagine the conversation. And then I went into Ulster Bank, and again, I had great leadership and friendship there. But now I've sort of grown up a bit, and I was more mature, and basically I didn't quite need the help so much. But again, everybody needs somebody, and they bought into me and gave me a great opportunity, and I managed to make it work big time. So I went from working in Deloitte, earning $4,500 a year, which was £268 a month. And I used to get the paycheck and go crazy, at the end of the month. Bloody hell, I lost more in the hand of cards than I was being paid in a month. And God, this is going to kill me, Having declined the priesthood, I was now in another vocation, which was accountancy. So anyway, I jumped out of that and found my way into a job in an investment bank. And what happened there is I went to the jobs fair at Queen's University, where I'd graduated the year before, and I met these guys and said, "Look, you know what? I'm trading shares. I used to bet horses, now I'm trading shares." And they're going, "What, really?" And gave me the job right away almost, and I started landing on my feet yet again. And so next thing, I have the car crash and I nearly die, and there's a fabulous consultant there, Mr. McAfee. And then I moves on to London, and I met a guy prior to the court case, and the guy in the court case was another great guy, Dermot O'Donovan, my barrister, who actually waived his fees, several thousand, 30 years ago, waived his fees because he was, in inverted commas, humbled by my response to the verdict. Now, they offered me 90,000 quid, which is worth about 300 grand today, and I ended up leaving with zero. So he didn't charge me any fees, which was fabulous. And so then I moved to London, but prior to going to London, I'd met this guy in Dublin, and I said, "Look, I've got this court case coming up, and if I win it, I won't go to your job, and if I lose it, I will." And what happened there is he came to Dublin looking for an Irishman, and I called him up and I said, "You need an Irishman?" I'd met him, and I said, "You need an Irishman?" He said, "Yeah, who?" And I said, "Me." And so he loved that, dined out on that. So I came to London with this guy looking out for me, looking after me, and I was his protege. And he had something to lose as well, because at least half the people would dismiss that right away. "Not touching that guy, what an idiot, calling me up like that." Whereas other people say, "Well, that's great, let's hire that guy," and he was in the latter camp. So all the way, there's been somebody, looking out for me, and I've needed it at every level. there we go. And what I've told you now takes me through to my 30s. You know, it's not to my teens.
Your story's crazy because like so many things, so many twists and turns. You know, like the gambling, very very high stakes gambling. Where I think I don't know who in the book says it. I think it was someone in the betting shop or something. They said you were gambling like winning and losing the equivalent of like a house, the cost of a house every week. You know, so it's like how this type of like mindset, how does this prepare you for like Wall Street and, you know, the hustle and how risky is, you know, this Wall Street? Because to most people, they don't understand like stocks and shares. Like for me, when to buy and sell and all these things. But how similar is it to everyday gambling?
Great question. You know, somebody on a different platform asked me, describe me as an addicted gambler. I had a gambling addiction, and I thought right away, no, I don't have a gambling addiction. So and then I tell my wife, she said, of course you have a gambling addiction. Everyone has an addiction, you know, gambling, sex, booze, whatever the hell it is, you know. Anyway, I still push back on that because my gambling had a very clear objective, which was to win. So I had, you know, I did bet big, but I didn't bet often necessarily, right? Everything was big. It was about the win. You know, you can call that an addiction, the adrenaline rush of winning, and winning big was what I wanted to do. So I actually stopped gambling a long time ago, and it's the simplest thing in the world for me to stop because at that point in time, I was earning $1 million a year, and you know, I may or may not lose 5 or 10 grand on a whim, and that was breaking all the rules. And I thought, bloody hell, just stop because this is no fun. So the high of winning was not there, and I stopped because I lost touch. You know, whereas before, when I was a kid, you know, and I was in my teens, I knew more than anybody, and I mean anybody. And this is part of my psychology as well. Because I have like an encyclopedic brain, I can retain all this stuff. Somebody would say something to me about a horse, and they'd have to step away because I would know more. You know, I'd say, well, that around that race, it goes that way, it goes left, right, you know, the ground conditions, the distance, everything, and give them 100 statistics about the horse and the race. And it's all right, okay, fair enough. And this was the same in the city. So to answer your question, you know, it did, again, the gambling was a massive help to me, the controlled aggression, I think, as Terry said earlier. And the city, the best guys in the city are all very, very single-minded, and you know, you will struggle to overcome them in any walk of life, you know. And there's some great guys. I mean, the city was a fabulous place to work, you know.
You do realize me and Terry are going to start asking you for betting tips now.
Yeah, no, it's the road to no town, as somebody used to say, and. Somebody used to say Barney Curley's roast, and Barney Curley was a local bookie, and his roast meant you're paying for his Sunday dinner by betting on horses, you know. And it's true, right? I mean, most people lose, and I wouldn't encourage it at all.
Yeah.
I was going to talk about, you know, you said before about it, how it's maybe this lifestyle before, the boxing, ups and downs, the gambling, lots and lots of things set you up for this lifestyle, and the stock market made you quite tough, yeah. But then towards the end of the book, you talk about Merrill Lynch hiring people from Oxford, and a totally different breed of people, you know, where the sense of entitlement maybe, and, you know, you just elaborate on this a little bit.
Well, the city became fashionable, you know, when I was in the city in 87, you know, Big Bang, as it was called, it just happened, and they moved away from the old school tie network, which was all the old boys, you know, who would have been all Oxbridge types. And there was an opening for the first time for people like me to come off the street and walk into these jobs, you know, and so which is what I did. I was very lucky, right place, right time. So by the time 2002, when I finally left, that was all going into reverse again. It became very fashionable to be in the city. And, you know, every young Turk wanted to be, you know, come out of Eton and Oxbridge to go to the city, you know, like, whereas during my time, that wasn't the case. So I found myself fighting back against that and complaining about the type of people we were being presented with. So essentially it was a thing called the internship, summer internship, and maybe have a dozen kids all running around the place for the summertime, and maybe a week, a month, whatever it would be, depending on who they knew, because a whole lot of it was nepotism, right? So and still is. You know, it's a very bad thing, a good thing and a bad thing, because you can meet great people, and I don't care where they come from. But so what was happening, I thought at that time, was the nepotism had just gone too far, and we were getting people who weren't equipped for the job, and the job is a tough game. You know, you've got to get up as a minimum very, very early every morning and be at your desk at 7 o'clock and work to 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, and just go and do this every day of the week and keep on going. And you live the job 24/7 because you're buying and selling in huge blocks of money, and you need to be with it on top of it. So never really leaves you. It's a 7-day, 24/7 job. So anyway, I was complaining that these people were coming in and were not suited for the job. So they said to me, well, tell you what, why don't you do it? So I give an example. It happens to be an American guy who came over with an MBA, and he loved himself. You know, he was going to be Gordon Gekko. You know, he had more interest in being sort of this big swinging dick, as we say in the city, than actually sitting down and doing the job. You know, can you do something for me? I want you to think about this. I want you to read that piece of research and give me a report in 10 minutes or in an hour. You know, it's a 20-page report. I want you to scan it and tell me what it's all about. You know, that's what we did. You know, we had to make quick decisions and read things and understand right from wrong and be right. Mm-hmm. And these guys were not equipped for that more and more. So I started complaining. They gave me the job. But then I moved to the country manager meeting, and I found myself like a duck out of water, because everybody there had been blue blood to the right school, not just school, but universities across Europe, you know, INSEAD, all these places. And even when I talked, I thought, Christ, I'm a duck out of water here, and I've got this funny accent, you know, inverted commas. And I had that moment, you know, I just got to the top of my mountain, and I said, I've had enough of this. Plus, I hated going to work. You know, I turned up, as I said, in the sort of football parlance, which is very much a city, you know, I was making $1 million a year, but I hated going to work. So I had my George Best moment, you know, and walked out in the job, you know, which was, by the way, a crazy mistake, just as it was for him. I should have really negotiated and said, I'm unhappy and I want to stay, and worked it out. And I would have done, and could have done, and the decision cost me a fortune. But also it gave me my chance to write my book. So anyway, that's it. I decided after a country managers meeting that I didn't fit anymore, and left. I went on sabbatical and never went back, which was always my intention.
Chris, you mentioned the duck out of water. That just brought to mind one of the last scenes in the epilogue, the life or death passages, where you mention these two swans as you're walking through a park. Both of them crash land. One of them lands on top of the steel fence, and you go over and you try and help the swan off the steel fence. It's pecking at you, but you struggle. You get it off the fence, and you see that it's bleeding, and it ends up losing one of its wings. And then you say, and then I remembered the off-duty nurse who saved you in that crash. And that's a beautifully written piece. Left me with a lump in my throat all afternoon.
It was quite a day. That I'm walking, and these things literally flop out from behind a steel fence right in front of me. One of them goes into the bush, and I can't work out what the hell's happened. What's that? You know, it's thinking like a big white sheet has fallen into the hedge. And then I looked to my left, and the other one's impaled, but I didn't know she was impaled. So I got in underneath her, and she was pecking at me. I'm trying to get her off, because I thought she'd fallen between the railings. You know, I thought she was just trapped, not impaled. Impaled never entered my head. So then as I realized my hand was covered in blood, and there was a dog barking away and trying to go after the other one, and I'm sort of, all hell is breaking loose in my head, you know. And so I just had to make that moment, you know, decision right now, get the swan off. So I got underneath her and yanked her up in the air. So actually, it caused quite an emotional moment, because I then had to get someone to stop the dog and look after the swans, and I literally ran off to the park warden's house. And the time I got there, I was actually quite distressed, because the whole thing was an emotional turmoil, which was a huge surprise to me. Like, why should something like that affect you, right? But because it did, then it really, really drove home for me what that girl had done to save my life that day. Yeah. And it also brought home words that she said at the time, which I had written in the book. She said, it was terrible. She said, I was trembling all day long afterwards. You can imagine. In that moment, I understood exactly what she was thinking and saying. If I didn't already understand, of course I did. You know, but yeah, it was a very interesting moment. A great sort of parallel for what happened.
When this story, people always think, well, Wall Street, Wolf of Wall Street, yeah. But like when with this story, it's got lots more heart. Yeah, it's all about like Terry said, it leaves a lump in your throat at times, because in many ways it's nothing like the Wolf of Wall Street. In many ways, it's not just about you having pleasure and there's lots of emotion, and it's not just about Wall Street and fancy suits and money.
I was going to say I've changed the name also. I'm always thinking I should have changed the name again. Can't do it again, but the $1 Million Irishman, I would drop that and just call it Chris McGale from John Street to Wall Street, because I'm not trying to boast about the money. A lot of people interpret it that way and then sort of get a kickback, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. There's no boasting in the story at all. It's a human story of, as you think said, great, huge ups and huge downs, and it's the ability to keep going is the challenge, right? Mm-hmm. So and survive, and that's what I mean. Right now, I'm on such a high because, you guys today. I had a fabulous interview yesterday. I've got RT Radio next Saturday on Easter Saturday. It's a prime slot. In the morning radio show with the top presenter. I've got Irish Television the week later, 6th of April. Tomorrow I'm in a Belfast newspaper called Sunday Life, and it's just such a high. All the messages come in. Got a lovely message from Terry yesterday reflecting the story he just told, and I told 100 people. I just got this great message because it's so uplifting, and it's great. I'm very, very happy right now, and I'm delighted I got to the end of the story, and I'm delighted to. I hope people take something out of it. In fact, I know, because at least 40% of the reviews have a word like inspired. Which is very gratifying for me to think that people are getting something out of it, and that means more than anything else. I promise you.
So for now we'll wrap it up, because Terry's mother-in-law is going to kill us. She's got to take a shopping.
Yeah, she's 85. We do a shopping for her every other Saturday. So
well done. It's a great background there, guys, and thank you so much for working so hard on preparing and getting it ready. But but I'll tell you one final thing. The audiobook is fabulous. I have listened to the audiobook twice since it came out on March the 11th, so just over 2 minutes. Fabulous stuff. And it's read by an Omagh actor called Colm Gormley, who's got a great story as well. The youngest of 15 kids who was at my school, the second school, St. Pat's, and got upgraded to the grammar school for his A-levels, got into Manchester University and was with Benedict Cumberbatch there in the thespian group, and went on to RADA and now works for the Royal Shakespeare Company. It's a great story, and he read the story absolutely beautifully. Colm Gormley. Well, one of the things about writing, Terry, you'll probably agree, I spent too long writing. There's no doubt about that. And one of the reasons I did is I was learning to write. So the early drafts were like learning to write. I should really have gone maybe to a course or something, or worked with somebody, not ghostwriting, but I got some help. So when I write today, it's so vastly superior to anything I could have written before, and all those years of writing, I probably spent 5 whole years on my backside in front of a computer writing that story, and too long. What do you say, Terry?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the more drafts, it's like any skill, the more you practice at it, the better you become. I think someone said about David Beckham, the more he practices, the luckier he gets of these free kicks.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Good luck with it, guys. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here today. I mean, every day is a bonus. Days like this, it's just great.
Yeah, it's lovely speaking to you, Chris. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks, Chris.
And thanks for, it was lovely. The questions were great because everything was related to the book, which you guys clearly not just had read, but engaged with. It's just such a pleasure, it really is. Thank you.
It was amazing. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. Cheers.
Bye, guys. All the best.
Bye now.